That's better for seeing the presenter, right?
Yeah, I think so. Okay, here we go.
We might have to play the game.
Are you bringing all your stuff to school tomorrow, or is that going to swing by?
So
Yeah, I can't.
Or I can even just get to your.
sitting on here, right? So
Get a little. I think so.
Oh,
something's wonky.
that's just weird. What's with this? What's with all the time?
some kind of sound effect on last time. That's why we got the reverb. So I turned that off. Keep talking.
Please help yourself to coffee and I don't know how many
Try-
donuts are left. You better hurry.
Did I turn it off?
There it is. Okay. Yeah.
Better than this one. Like my first video, they were fine. Yeah, I think because like when I pulled them out of the oven, like they were still cooling and they were still kind of like mushy, like I hadn't cooked them through it. I think they just kind of finished it. They were better this time.
Is there any way to flip them? Yeah. So it's like that.
7 out of 10.
Okay. Now try.
Is that better?
Perfect.
I should've,
Yeah.
like,
It's going out.
because I just scooped cream cheese. Made it look smoother. So
Actually, trying to organize. Oh yeah, this like
it's probably the first time I ever made an oven.
Oh, you've got your computer here. That'll be a better way to test it.
Yeah.
Oh, I brought my computer.
But I didn't make it.
I was actually thinking today.
Ah, that was
very clever.
It happens infrequently.
every
but-
now and then.
She's the one who's been putting it together. I think. But yeah.
So, Locke, we've had over 250 views of our live streams thus far, total. Yeah, from the 3 that we've done. So that's pretty good. What's our target? Yeah, like no, this is like yeah. Make sure you really think Monster Energy drink as many times as you can. Yeah.
You should have given me a can.
Yeah, Red Bull,
And
the-
can, like,
Yeah.
I love when you turn upside down.
Yeah, exactly. You know, like old '80s movie style, really awkwardly hold the Cheerios box so that it's.
I love
But it's not sure. Actually, ask her
So I should have looked past this table.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
this line here, roughly.
It's so the color balance is so off. Oh no, that's all right on there.
Yeah, yeah. The camera. I don't know
The
why.
live stream has
Yeah.
it, just not-
I'm not sure why it mirrors it like that, but it does. Okay.
And how's the sound?
Is it muted?
Last chance for coffee and.
It is not.
Any donuts
Want to
left?
split one?
Okay.
Yeah.
There's still donuts left too.
There's two left. Right?
I
Yeah.
don't know at dinner.
Justin, we went super high tech in your absence. We went super high tech in your absence. We went super high tech with the whole speakers. In other words, we have microphones now.
No, light should be good.
Yeah.
Let's get you a microphone though.
Who got the equipment? Who's it?
Yeah.
Whose idea was that?
Yo.
Really? Oh, right on.
And then I recruited Brandon, who knew how to do all this stuff.
Yeah.
Welcome everyone. I'm Locke Fraser and I'm organizing the Environmental Science Seminar Series for this semester. And next week, we do not have a talk. We usually have a talk every week in this place at this time. And everyone's welcome. And there's coffee and donuts to those who get here first. And next week, we don't actually have a scheduled talk, but come back the following week. Jose Ramon Urbez Torres from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada Summerland Research and Development Center will be here, and he'll be talking about plant pathology and advancing science and helping the public. So that should be a really interesting talk. And I'll also mention the talk following that one, which is the week before reading break, where there is no talk. And there, Mike Cardwell from UC San Diego will be coming and talking about Northern Pacific rattlesnakes in a Mediterranean climate. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Sereana Patterson. Sereana has been involved at TRU now for some time because there was a huge grant that came through Rod McCormick's initiative, and it's dealing with his research center, All My Relations. And Sereana was brought up from UBC to really keep the whole center together, and that's been her role here. While she's also been completing her PhD at UBC, and also giving birth to her baby daughter. And it has all come together wonderfully because she's completed her PhD. Her baby daughter is a year and a half old. She's a research associate in the Faculty of Education and Social Work here at TRU. As I said, she's been managing All My Relations. She's also been really the spearhead from Knowledge Makers, the Knowledge Makers program, and that's what Sereana is here to talk to you about today. So I'm really happy that she's come and she'll share with us what's going on at Knowledge Makers. So please join me in welcoming Sereana.
My name is Sereana Naifi. I'm named after my great-grandmother who raised my mother in the village of Makinda in Meita City, Fiji. My last name is that of my husband's, whose family were from Alasali and Tamakatonga in Niue. Him and I are both children of the migration, which means that completing our education, traveling overseas are things that our families moved from the South Pacific to Aotearoa, New Zealand for. I'd like to acknowledge the territory on whose, the land on whose, I'd like to acknowledge the land on which we stand, that is the work that I do. I'm forever grateful of your patience with me. I can be a very bossy Pacific woman sometimes, and I'm really grateful that they are patient and remind me of how I should go about my research. I wanted to start today talking a little bit about why knowledge makers is necessary, which means we have to touch on what higher education institutions have been, what they are, and just acknowledge the foundations of the work that we do. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what knowledge makers is, and then finally give you some examples of our knowledge makers articles. Universities, don't get me wrong, I'm still working in one, so clearly I see some value here. But we do need to recognize that for most universities, unless they've been designed very specifically, foundationally, universities are built from a Western ontology, right? So they work from a sort of, it's a mono-knowledge system. And there's a big push now that we should become pluriversities. And that just means that we need to understand that there is more than one knowledge system and pay respect, engage with these other knowledge systems so that we can learn a lot more about this world. These quotes have all the wonderful big words that my discipline loves. So the presumption of a Eurocentric epistemic canon that attributes truth only to the Western way of knowledge production at the expense of disregarding other epistemic traditions. So that's really just about how a lot of Indigenous knowledge, until very recently, was not accepted in the academy, and a really problematic history of if knowledge from Indigenous communities was seen as useful, it was not attributed to Indigenous communities. Or even more disturbing, the research that was done around the first step of colonization is to understand Indigenous people. In order to discover a land, you have to understand that the people there are not people, otherwise you couldn't have discovered it. And that's sort of the first step towards disregarding Indigenous peoples and knowledge, is that we had to first be seen as not human for our land to be discovered. And if you are not human, then any research done is on, right? The same way that we do research on animals was the same way that research was engaged with in the Pacific and throughout Indigenous communities. As a result of that sort of foundational move, the colonial project has deemed who can produce knowledge and who cannot. I was seeing someone who could not produce useful knowledge. My community, our history is a history. Who's seen Moana? Yeah, I know you watch Disney. So for a really, really long time, Pacific people accidentally discovered the Pacific. We were blown off course. We accidentally put all of our women into waka and supplies and our animals that we were breeding for food. We accidentally put them in a waka or a double-hulled canoe, and we accidentally sailed across the Pacific. That was the narrative that we were told for a really long time. It turns out, as a Pacific person, my ancestors can stand in the Pacific, and they knew how far away an island was based on how quickly the waves were touching them. They could watch the birds and knew which island was coming. The stars told us. We had really complex navigational stories. We have really complex political systems. And colonization interrupted that process. And the worst part is they didn't just interrupt it for that moment, they continue to. They continue to raise us saying that we did not know things and that the knowledge we had was not valuable. What knowledge makers is an interruption to this. And one of our knowledge makers last year really wanted to do knowledge makers because for her, it was about seeing herself in the institution, right? She comes from a hunting community, so she understands how animals move across the land. She knows really complex things that you have to go to university and study for a really long time. She's known since she was small, but she's been told that knowledge isn't valuable and she's never seen it here. So for her, interacting with knowledge makers was about seeing those ways of knowledge. She puts it as native ways of knowing inside the school. Any questions about the foundations of universities? I can give you all of the answers. So knowledge makers so far, we've been running for 4 years. We've had 56 knowledge makers. Out of that, we've had 64 articles. These are self-identified. So I understand that not all of these are recognizable nations, or perhaps they've used a term for a nation that isn't always used, but these are self-identified nations. So we have Indigenous students from across Canada or across Turtle Island, and they come and engage with us. In 2017, we had, for the first time ever, we had over 50% from Sequoia. It's huge. We're so excited. Of those 56 knowledge makers, 2 have won national scholarships. 1 has a national research grant from SHIRT for $50,000, 16 research assistants, 6 graduate research scholarships, 4 master's students, hopefully more, international internships, post-bac studies, UREAP grants, and 1 business. We're not claiming this success. A lot of these students are successful, would have been successful. What knowledge makers did is provide a space to have some conversations that perhaps they hadn't had before. In order for knowledge makers to be successful, we have 5 approaches in strong Indigenous research mentoring. The first is that the knowledge of our ancestors is to be respected and is valid. We understand that when you walk into a room, you walk in with multiple people behind you. So the same way I introduced my name, the name that I carry, the same as my daughter, she carries a name that tells you who she is and a little bit about her. So for me, when knowledge makers enter our classroom, when they enter our space, we're respecting the knowledge of their ancestors as valid and as valid in the academic process. If you ever want to talk about long-term research studies, ask Indigenous people about their land, right? They've been doing it for years, we just haven't called it research. We value Indigenous research methods. We know that we're expanding the research canon, but we're resisting miraculating the Indigenous. It is not a miracle that I am an Indigenous Fijian with a PhD in Canada. But it is also not like we are critical of the current Indigenous research methods and methodologies. At the moment, there's sort of a pattern of overarching research methods for Indigenous, but we need to recognize that it's not possible to have an overarching, that each of us as communities developed our own ways of knowing and recognizing that within the methods and methodologies. And so it's not that when you write an Indigenous research method or methodology, it doesn't mean you're beyond critique. You can still be critiqued, and you need to be trained in how to respond to those critiques. We take a strengths-based approach, so we consciously work against deficit thinking, research, design, and words. So we're not talking about closing the gap. We're not talking about the students need to get better. We're talking about how the institution can change, and we're talking about what the students bring with them. And just shifting your language can do quite a lot. Research is service. So I think a big moment for me as a researcher was understanding that my research can be of service to my community. So in my PhD, I did my first round of interviews, and then I took those interviews and went back to the community with the themes and said, does this make sense? Can you tell me if this is right? Have I come up with the same things? Turns out feminism's not a thing. Don't use feminism to look at specific words, worldviews, right? They didn't want feminism anywhere near their stories. Not because they don't believe in equity, but we just have a different word and a different way of understanding that. And so that piece is a service piece, going back and saying, is this right? And then I've made a commitment. They've all got copies of my PhD, and there's also a commitment that they'll get a 2-page summary, and I will email them to the VCs of each university. I'm sure they're going to read it. But, you can't just, we have really urgent issues that need to be worked on as communities. We have things we want addressed. And because of that, when we conduct research, it is of service, and it needs to be action-driven, and there needs to be change. It doesn't matter what we're doing, it needs to change something. And we're committing to legacy. We understand that as an Indigenous researcher, we're creating legacy here. At the moment, we're addressing a legacy of colonization through our work, and we want in 2, 3, 4 academic generations to that's not going to be their legacy. I'm a product of the Indigenous academic legacy. I was able to use Indigenous 3/4 of my references. I can say are Pacific. I'm a product of that Indigenous academy. I no longer have to cite some white anthropologist who didn't really understand what was happening in Samoa. Right? I can cite my own people. There's 5 modalities for knowledge makers. So I meet with, or the coordinator will meet with the knowledge makers one-on-one. So they apply once they meet with us, and once they apply, we let them know. The reason I'm showing this picture is Tessa is a fine arts student, and they get really self-conscious about producing an academic article. And so we found this book, Read, Listen, Tell. Inside Read, Listen, Tell is a comic. So we wanted her to know that you can do academic writing and you can have a comic. So this year, Knowledge Makers is going to have a design. One of our fine arts students has created a design, and she has an academic piece next to it that kind of explores what's happening in that design. But we wanted them to know that it doesn't matter what discipline you're in, there are Indigenous researchers who have been there, and there are people you can lean on. There are people who are trying new things. E-portfolios, I'm not sure if you guys had a look at the website. The e-portfolio piece is for our students where they introduce themselves, introduce their relationship with research, things like that. The reason we get them to do that is so that in the first year we didn't do this. In the first year the students came in and we said, okay, tell us about your community values. And then we spent the whole day talking about what it means to be a community. Am I part of a community if I'm not living with my community? Am I part of my community if I've never lived with my community? And we touched on some really sensitive subjects that very important conversations, but we realized that there needed to be some thinking before we got in that room. We needed to start thinking about those hard questions before we got in. So they introduced themselves. So Roxy tells us a little bit about herself. Roxy is amazing. I don't know if any of you, I know some of you are master's students, I don't know if any of you happen to come across her. She's going to go do her PhD, and she's written it, I will do my PhD. And she's going to be a free-range social worker. So it's really just about introducing themselves to the world. That 30 seconds pitch, elevator pitch that you guys did, this is their online 30-second elevator pitch. We asked them to think of someone in their community who inspires them and what it is about them that inspires them. What values do they think? And the reason we wanted them to talk about values is ultimately, even though the university says that we conduct bias-free research, we don't. Even in creating a question, there's some form of thinking behind that question. Why is that question important? And so we wanted them to identify their own values so that they can understand how those values drive their research. So for Matisse, if for her she's dedicated to someone, like for her, someone who inspires them is somebody who advocates for us all. So Matisse, one of Matisse's values is community. So if her single core value is built from community, that's going to change how she looks at an issue. Because instead of looking at how an individual experiences something, she's looking at how a community experiences something. So that changes the question completely. And then we gave them some quotes from Indigenous researchers, but also encouraged them to look up their own. The Faculty of Nursing, all of the students were like, yeah, we've got our own, we're done. They're amazing that way. But so Charlotte here uses a quote from Elsie where it's about the land. So for her, it's about how it was, well, the reason we get them to look at Indigenous research quotes is we want them to see that they're not the first. You're not the first to start this journey. You're not going to be the last. And you're definitely not going to be by yourself in this journey. So one of the things that happens from that one-on-one meeting is that book, if you remember, each knowledge maker gets a folder, and in that folder is 2 generic what is Indigenous research methodologies articles and 3 personalized articles. One from someone from their nation who is writing and is doing research, and 2 from any Indigenous person in their discipline in their area. So we want them to see, ideally it would be amazing if we could get someone from their nation in their area, but that's not always possible. We want them to see themselves in the work. Then we have a workshop, it's 2 days. We invite all 4 elders. We enter into that room in ceremony. We are some of the very few who have been blessed to hear Uncle Mike come and sing. He does that at Knowledge Makers. So we are drummed into that room. We enter in circle, we stay in circle, and in circle we talk about what research is. When you come into a class, usually I did a postgraduate certificate in teaching for higher education. They're like, when you start, PowerPoint slide, 3 things they're going to get, 3 definite things they're going to get from this class. Do it, tell them, at the end, 3 definite things they're going to get in this class. Tell them what time, do all of this. In this workshop, we have 2 goals each day. We will reach those 2 goals at some point, hopefully. And the reason it works like that is we have 4 elders in the room who participate. Uncle Mike was really excited last year. We had hunting, so he was talking a lot about hunting practices. We invite every single Indigenous faculty member and staff member. They come in. Bernie has shared on his journey. Paul Michelle shares stories about how medicine gathering is similar to research. And we stop whatever we're doing at that moment. They come in, they talk, they share their stories, the students question them. Sometimes they stay for lunch, sometimes they don't, and then they leave. It operates as an Indigenous gathering where it is open, people come, they share, they have what they have to offer, and then they go. The fact that we're supposed to have research plans by the end of the day is just a small detail. Every year we've managed to have them. So we have research intentions that the students think about the change they want to see in the world, so the service that they want their research to be, and how they're going to get there. In this particular exercise that you can see, this particular one is Justin. I love Justin. He really didn't know what he wanted to do. He wanted to do everything. And so Professor Irene is working with Justin to take this everything and turn it into a single idea, a single piece of writing. So we workshop how to do an academic article. And we have a formal call for papers. So our journal is not like it's an official peer review journal. We have a formal call for papers. We have a peer review process. We have a copy editing process. From peer review, if the editorial board is concerned, they meet with a member of the editorial board. We go through their article. And then we send it back. They have 2 weeks to sort that out. And then it goes out for copy editing and it goes back. It's just like when you have to put into a normal academic journal article, because it is an academic journal. We present this overseas. We have people overseas reading it. We have people citing it. It's fun. So this is what the students get out of it. One of my favorite moments last year was one of our students was like, I'm going to go home and tell my dad. She had been so excited about what she'd experienced in the classroom that she wanted to rake him and tell him about her time and tell him about how, what we talked about, all the different things. A recognition, so for this one, it was a recognition. Remember we talked about the importance of Indigenous knowledge being valid. So that piece there is a recognition that we have a lot to teach this world, right? Indigenous peoples, we know a lot, we have a lot to teach. And then the ripple effect. Did you read Roger Cormack's piece in Knowledge Makers? So this was before Rod even wrote about it, and yet it came through. So this idea that the ripple effect is enormous as Indigenous researchers. And we talked about that earlier in the staff room. We can just get one, we can get a whole community. And one of the students in the first year came in and she was really anxious. She was, we need to save the language, we need to save the environment, we need our political system's a mess, we need to, what's going on in education? And she was really anxious about all these different things that she wanted us to sort of deal with. oh, we've got this. As a group, we've got this, and I can take care of the language. You sort out our political autonomy. You sort out our education rates. You're going to talk to the tourism people. Salmon has been a big piece as well. We've had a few science students come through and talk about salmon. So it really is about recognizing they're not by themselves and that all of us are doing our own little thing. This one is connected to, for us to sit here today, it feels so very powerful. I feel connected to past generations who were not able to see what we have to come. I feel we need to make our lives count for everyone. That's recognizing that when we're in the room, those who came before us and those yet to come. So when we're doing research, it's the legacy and the recognition of our ancestors. So what legacy are we leaving for our children? Or here it's the next 7 generations. What's the legacy we're leaving in research with that? And would our ancestors recognize us today? That's quite where I'm from. That's one of the big things is, could your ancestors stand in a room and talk with you today? And would they recognize what you have to say? And then I think a lot of you will probably feel the same about us. I got started. It's often the hardest thing. We're brilliant procrastinators as students. We make them get started that day. Start today. Then we publish a journal. I don't know if any of you have been to our Celebrating Indigenous Research dinner. That is the journal publication. So that piece is dotted with international Indigenous researchers from TRU, and our knowledge makers students and our knowledge makers alumni. And the reason we do that is because it's really important that they see themselves as, it's an academic piece of writing. It's not, it really is a legitimate journal, and helping them to see other more senior academics write in that piece helps. When you go through the journal, as some of you have, there's photos from the days, there's quotes from the days. And the reason we do that is it's also one of those things that we want to take with them on their journey. I don't know about you, but as a graduate student, there were moments when I was like, why did I do this? Why? I moved to the other side of the world, why? And that journal, the quotes and the pictures are to remind them of why, and to take them back to a place that was inspirational for them. Our Celebrating Indigenous Research dinner is where we give the journals. Each student gets 5 copies. The first copy goes to somebody that they invited with them, or sometimes the person could come. It's a recognition of Indigenous practices that the first kill or the first catch or the first harvest goes to somebody else. So the first copy is given to another person in that room. Each knowledge maker is invited up to talk and to acknowledge those people. It is the most emotional day of the year for me. We do it Indigenous style. There was no limit on how many people could be invited. We've had families of 12 come. We have had small children. My daughter has been one of those ones screaming in the back with Bernie's on it. And last year, one of our knowledge makers' daughters stood up and said, I want to be a knowledge maker. This is what I want when I come to TRU. So they acknowledge their families are with them, their friends are with them, the president comes, the VP Research, Will Garrett Petts talks. We have a international keynote comes and speaks. Last year we had Dr. Carlo Mila, who's a poet, and Gary Goffredson had taken her around Kamloops and around Scriptbulu, and she'd written a poem specifically for that dinner. They share about their research journey. We call all the knowledge makers on stage. We open the floor. Their families talk to them. It's really just a moment of celebration, because you can't just do it with the students, because the only reason they were able to do this journal article was because of the people that came with them. So we've acknowledged those before, we've acknowledged those to come, and we're acknowledging those people in the room with them. Or we get families drive 4 hours to come to this dinner. Right? Which for me, from New Zealand, 4 hours is really far. Turns out for Canadians, not that far. This is a big moment for us, and for us it's about bringing the community to Patterson University and letting them see that we take care of them. We will take care of their family while they're here. Now the exciting part. So in the really wordy abstract we were going to talk about how undergraduate students were pushing back against the monocultural, monolinguist, mono-language, mono-knowledge university with different ways of thinking. This was our first one. As a graduate student, I will share with you that we put this together with other graduate students at Green College, and we were up until 4 in the morning. So this is our first one, and I'm pretty sure that everyone I lived with was. I'm lucky that I lived with graduate students. They're lovely people. So we edited this. It got put together. Levi Glass designed that last image. He's a fine arts student at Thompson Rivers University. This image speaks to the practice here of pine needle basket weaving. Knowledge makers are building knowledge on something that's already been built, but it's not finished, it won't be finished. So that's what that logo speaks to. He was one of our first knowledge makers. Marcus, he wrote about the importance of research and the value of knowledge makers. So he came in and he's a business student, and he was like, I don't see my discipline here yet. We're like, okay, cool. Write about knowledge makers. And he did. He reflected a bit on that. And then I think we had a couple of science students. Jordan, yes. Between the Two Worlds and the Half-Breed. That is a very powerful piece. If you have a moment, read Jordan's piece. And Jordan is the mastermind behind knowledge makers, I'm going to be honest. So initially it was called the Indigenous Undergraduate Research Program. And Randy was like, what? Call it knowledge makers. And then we couldn't get anyone to sign up. We were giving $1,000 and we couldn't get anyone to sign up. And Jordan, bless him, went into the house and he was like, hey, I'm doing this thing, you guys should do it with me. And he recruited our first group. So it was a science student who really was the guy who got this to happen. Because I was living in Vancouver, I couldn't come and bully students into joining, so Jordan did. So he writes, read his piece. It's really powerful. It made me cry. He spoke at the dinner, and a lot of people cried at the dinner when he spoke. And he talks about that complexity of walking in two worlds and how do we do that. Ryan, so I've used his quote, Ryan down here. He's talking about Aboriginal peoples in Canada have an absolute right to self-government. So his point is that the essential point is that First Nations have the absolute right to self-government, although this right has always existed. So he's written a really cool piece looking at the different sort of treaties and agreements and things like that about how, at the end of the day, First Nations have a right to self-governance and how do we get there. Garnet Dirksen was a fine arts student. Has anyone seen Before They Pass? It's a beautiful photo series. It's really problematic. So this guy, Jimmy Nelson's gone around the world and taken photos of Indigenous people in their natural settings before they go. And they're not natural, they're dressed and posed, and it's ridiculous. Beautiful photos. I would love it if you took photos with it. But as Garnet points out, the situation is framed in a way that Indigenous people's disappearance is inevitable, and thus the only course of action is to buy the book or visit the exhibition. So Garnet was problematizing this, looking at this, and he goes all the way back to early anthropology and taking photos of Indigenous people and get a document of where they go, and it's still continuing. This practice still continues, and people get real rich of it. For 2017, we had those names.
Hey, Brandon, do we have a spot on that we can free up? Do we need the monitor plugged in?
Okay. Noah. So Noah's piece was really cool. Noah wanted to bring on, he's really interested in bringing the art of kayaking and kayak voyaging back to his area. So he did a piece on so consider social politics and kayaking. He really wants to bring that out we showed him how you can kind of do that. Like research is an avenue for that if you'd like it to be. He wrote a piece, and he was the person who said to us, I want this written in my language. We weren't able to do it that year, and we couldn't get the translators in time. So each year now, we tell the knowledge makers in our first one-on-one meeting, if you want this translated, you need to tell me today. We need to make that decision today. Because he was right. It needs to be recorded in his language. Why should it only be in English? He also had a moment of genius in the workshop. We were talking about epistemologies, ontologies, axiologies, all of the big words. And he said it was a long word. And then he laughed and we looked at him and he said, in my language, the word for ontology is so much longer. He was like, we can do big words. Why are we scared of them? So I wanted to highlight Marina. So Marina's piece is the opening piece, and she wrote a piece based on an assignment that she did. So she was asked to do an assignment, and she rewrote it from using like sort of an Indigenous perspective. So she wrote it from her own perspective. So even though I may sing with only my own being, the songs of others like me on similar paths, join with me in voice to become a chorus. And with that chorus, we can sing in power. So for her, knowledge makers helped her to find a voice. She already had a voice, and anyone who reads any of Marina's work, she does some creative work as well. Anyone who reads any of her works, amazing. Rochelle Devon, she's on Twitter. The life sacrifice for sustainability must be respected and valued. People should work towards hunting to sustain, not for gain. Sorry, no, Rochelle. The Twitter person's next one. Rochelle is a business graduate. And so she was really interested in the idea of hunting, and the wife was really, really, really excited to talk to her. And she's just saying, come on, she's worried about the hunting practices that are going on. And for her, she really wanted her research to speak to the idea that we need to change hunting and how we go about hunting, and we need to bring back the sacred. Because if we understand the sacred again, we'll probably be a little bit more sustainable about how we do this. This was last year's. As you can see, they get bigger and bigger every year. So each year the journal grows. And our the guy who puts this together, he gives us a flat rate. I think it's going to change. So we last year we had Jana Whale science, the cultural and ecological implications of declining wild salmon stock. She's our alumni writer this year. So she submitted another piece for us this year that she's used Indigenous research methodologies to explore her time working with the BC ferry system. I don't think there's another science one yet. Okay, so those of you who teach undergraduate science students, tell them to join knowledge makers. We need some more. I love the science students. I do. They teach me a lot about this world that I wish I knew already. So Jacqueline Matisse. So for her, by putting my paper forward and vocalizing the changes that need to be enforced, I will help my family and other Indigenous people reclaim their voices. So she wrote about receiving and modern oppression within my family. So she talked about the sort of ongoing impact of colonization and what that's done to her family now, and how they're moving past, not moving past, we can't move past this, how they're moving with it, and how as a family they're responding. Janelle Point is the person you should follow on Twitter. Janelle is great. So ultimately, Indigenous tourism products should be informed by the people who carry our stories, our truths, and our ceremonies. So Janelle wrote about how storytelling and land use informs authentic tourism experience. So she wrote about a tourist experience that currently happens on her land. And she was like, if they added this story about these two mountains, it would enrich not only the tourist experience, but it would help us to continue our own traditions. And we need to move past sort of put on the regalia, do a dance sort of tourism. Let's do tourism that's meaningful to our people, not just meaningful to the voyeurs who are coming through. And I think what gets me with knowledge makers is that it is multidisciplinary. So they're pushing back against this institution in lots of different ways. We've got people pushing across. always get a couple of finance students. Being a computer science student, there are Indigenous academics in computer science and they're publishing in computer science. So every time I think, oh my gosh, we're not going to find anyone, we find someone. And I think that that's something to keep in mind is that if you have any students in your classes, like, be really proactive and try to find somebody in their field so they can see themselves there. And as graduate students in the sciences, think about who you're reading, right? I'm an educationalist. I sometimes do sociology pieces. I tell knowledge making students as well, it is a political act to cite someone who is a person of color or who is Indigenous. So expand your reading list. I'm really sorry, lecturers. But expand that reading list because you'll learn so much. And if it's not, a lot of you work in communities. We were talking about how some of you are working directly with the community. Do that in a meaningful way. One of the hardest things for me about working in cameras is that I know I am building a bond here that I'm not allowed to walk away from. Yeah, I can't just cut and run. Right? I have to do things with the community before I go. And I think that that's something to keep in mind as researchers is you can't just be in the community one day and out the next. And that's what a lot of the bad researchers come from. That's why it's kind of good to have Indigenous researchers who are tied to the community and understand research as service. Because if we understand research as service, it changes our entire view on research. And I wanted to share finally Elder Estella Patrick Bowler's words. So she joined us and she said to us that being part of Knowledge Makers has opened up a huge door that I thought might never happen in my lifetime. I'm just so grateful now that all the knowledge that I have is not going to get lost. So proud of you. So she shares about, and Uncle Mike shares as well, like, Uncle Mike lived in a time when Indigenous people couldn't gather in groups of more than 6. That he couldn't talk about this knowledge on this campus without police being called. He couldn't, like his family couldn't conduct ceremony. And Elder Estella talks about the same thing. And for them to be in a classroom where not only are we talking about it, but we're celebrating it, we're saying it's valid, we're saying that we have more to offer this institution than they know, that's a big thing. And for us, that's what Knowledge Makers is about. It's about owning this space, saying this is ours. I think one of the graduate students asked me how am I not super frustrated all the time at the university. I study university, how am I not angry all the time? And it's because there are moments like this. And it's these moments that make Knowledge Makers what it is when the elders say, this is a good program to keep doing it.
So there is time for questions. And if you hold a moment while someone brings the microphone.
Thank you, Sereana. That was a wonderful presentation. It was lovely to see some of our faculty of science students in this there.
The question I have is, do you see any kind of shift towards more males, more females who are participating, or is it 50-50?
Females outnumber most years. We have to be very active recruiting our males. The first year we had mostly males, and I think that was Jordan. He just got his friends. And I think that that's a pretty normal reflection of higher education in general. If you sort of move up the ranks, that more females are participating. It's a pattern that seems to be moving that way. The only way to address it that I used to do at the University of Auckland when I was there was I would get people like Jordan and go, you go and get me some boys. Because it seemed to be the only way. I could ask them as many times as I wanted to and they would come.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is Knowledge Makers reaching out to the K-12 community?
So, Knowledge Makers is a research office funded. and governed, but education and social work runs it. So all my relations is part of the Faculty of Education and Social Work, but it's across the university. Education and social work, Eileen and I run knowledge makers, but Eileen and I are working on a Ministry of Education, BC Ministry of Education project that is addressing some of the K-12 things. But the Faculty of Education and Social Work is also doing a K-16 project. So they're working with the school district here. I am not part of that team, so I don't know a lot about it, but I know that there are listers of things happening. When we present this in local conferences, we get asked to come to schools, and we always say, yes, we'll come, but let us know when. And it never seems to quite work out. I think it would be beautiful to start earlier. I start at where I start because that's where I can start. But if I could get into the classroom earlier, why not? That's how you get students to university.
Yeah, exactly. Although, I think the whole journal is just such a wonderful product, and the whole journey and process that goes into this beautiful production and the celebration and ceremony around it. It's also it's very family-like, and yet I can see. I mean, how would that approach be possible if there was interest outside of TRU for people to contribute to the journal?
We're hoping to launch an international national journal with the idea that those little hubs run their own sort of knowledge makers. They produce their own knowledge makers in their area, and then we have a national international one as well. It has to be, we've got our sort of 5 principles, but they need to be enacted locally. So for some people, walking in with drum and stage is not what they do in their territory, so we won't do it. But you create that ceremony and that family aspect based on those. Oddly, Eileen and I are both Pacific, running a program, the Indigenous program here. We're working with others to hand that on. But there are some things that I think Indigenous people and people in general agree on principally. And you just move from there and how those principles are enacted.
Thanks, Sereana. This is a question from one of the folks who's tuning in, a fellow named Brandon John. I says, hi, Sereana. Thanks for your really interesting and insightful seminar. Your comment about reintegrating an aspect of sustainability to instill a better sense of sustainability really resonated with me. What are your goals for the program in the short term, and where would you like to see it in 5 to 10 years? And he then corrects himself to say, sorry, I mean spirituality to instill sustainability. So reintegrating spirituality into research and practice to instill principles of sustainability.
Okay, so that was one of the knowledge makers articles where she wanted to reintroduce spirituality to hunting for sustainability. So she's unfortunately working for, she didn't go into research, but I keep in contact with her. So I think spirituality is always hard because people hear the word spirituality and they freak out a little bit sometimes. So one of the things that, like we use ceremony or prayer, or there are all these words in English that have different meanings to different people. Really, we're just trying to ground people. We're trying to bring that aspect of, in terms of research, if we re-ground ourselves in the people and communities that we work with, you can do that through spirituality, through prayer, through ceremony, through it really depends on the community you're working with and how they see it as building a relationship. So does it build a relationship to engage in ceremony with your community that you've done research with? And once you engage in ceremony, what does it mean? I've engaged in ceremony here. My bobo or my grandmother told me I couldn't do ceremony in Vancouver because I was there temporarily. And I think in terms of research sustainability, I'm not sure if he means like the sustainability of hunting or research sustainability. The sustainability of hunting is a student's project. Research sustainability, for this program to sustain itself, we need investment from academics at TRU, and we need investments from TRU is behind 100%. It's been really nice to have the research office get behind this and not put up any institutional walls. But we really need academics and faculty within TIU to step up and say this is important to me, because at the moment it's resting on two people, and no program should rest on personalities. It should be structurally embedded. So we have to work out how to structurally embed knowledge makers so that if for whatever reason two people can't be here, it still runs.
Thanks for the interesting talk. I'm curious to know, I know this is early in, it's like the third year, right? You've done this, fourth year. Okay. Is there a plan in the longer term to try to keep track of the people who've been through this and see how it may influence their lives? Maybe compare it to those who did not go through it, and to see in what ways this program makes a difference. Are these people energized to go on and do some kind of future knowledge making more than people who did not go through it? Is that part of the plan?
Yeah, so one of the things we are doing is applying for a grant, and built into that is this idea that we should be able to track them. This program was started when I was a research assistant. Now I work full time, and I snuck it into my job description. And so we're trying to work out a way to track it because I think it's important. And that I'm an educational researcher, so I like to keep track of these things and to work out. It is loosely based on my experiences of the program at the University of Auckland called Tōkana. And Tōkana mentors students from undergraduate to PhD. It's not all research based, it's not specifically research based like knowledge makers. And of people who took part in Tōkana, the alumni are becoming kind of powerful people in the world of the Māori Pacific world back in Aotearoa. You see people on television like, oh, they were at Tōkana. And so I don't know how much of their success you can attribute to that program, which is always the fuzzy line. But it doesn't hurt them to take part as far as we can tell. So yeah, we would like to gather the data, but from what we've seen so far, it's doing good things. And based on international models, good things. Hopefully.
Is there any more questions for Sereana? If not, then please join me again in thanking Sereana.